I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. Defense Minister Anita Anand says for far too long, the government failed to dedicate enough time, money, personnel, and effort to deal with sexual harassment and sexual assault within the military.
For far too long, your government failed to dedicate enough time, money, personnel, and effort to deal with sexual harassment, sexual assault, and discrimination based on sex, gender, gender identity, and sexual orientation in the military and the department. Countless lives have been harmed because of inaction and systemic failure.
Well, as you heard, she issued a formal apology this afternoon to victims of military sexual misconduct, saying things can, must, and will change. Chief of the Defense Staff, General Wayne Eyre, and Defense Department Deputy Minister Jody Thomas also offered apologies on behalf of their institutions. This as part of the government's $600 million settlement agreement in relation to several class action lawsuits. Meanwhile, the federal government has instructed the Bank of Canada to keep the annual inflation rate between 1% and 3%. The renewed 5-year inflation targeting agreement also outlines that the bank should consider how close employment levels are to the highest mark they can hit before fueling inflationary problems. That could mean the Bank of Canada will keep its trend-setting interest rate at the lowest level possible for longer stretches. This to help the economy recover from a downturn. Turning to Ontario now, where the leading physician says Omicron will likely become dominant within weeks. The development comes after weeks of a steadily rising disease curve, with over 1,470 cases reported on Sunday. The 7-day average is 1,236 daily infections, which is up from 920 just a week ago. Experts are calling on the province to explain how it plans to shift its pandemic response. A University of Toronto epidemiologist says Omicron is hitting at the worst possible time. This comes as health workers contend with burnout and pandemic-wary residents gear up for holiday gatherings. Well, speaking of gatherings, a good number of Canadians who know a family member or friend who isn't vaccinated against COVID-19 have given up trying to convince them to get their shots. A new Leger poll finds only about 1 in 8 of 1,500 people surveyed get into an argument over the person's vaccination status. Quebecers were most likely to try to convince others to get shots, while people in prairie provinces were most inclined to drop the subject. New Brunswick has joined 8 other provinces in signing on to the federal government's $10 a day childcare plan. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement this morning in a joint news conference with Premier Blaine Higgs. Mr. Trudeau says the federal government program will grow the economy. This by letting more women re-enter the workforce while giving children the best possible schooling. Ontario's online portal for booking COVID-19 vaccines experienced some technical issues Monday morning. This as residents 50 and older become eligible for a third dose, provided their second one was just 6 months ago. It comes as Federal Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam tabled her annual report. In it, she says Canada was not prepared to face a public health emergency of the magnitude of COVID-19. Dr. Tam is using her report to urge the federal government to make fundamental changes. This so the country is better equipped to handle present and future health threats. The Quebec government shut down 4,000 of its websites over the weekend. This as a preventative measure following threats of a cyber attack. The province's Minister of Digital Transformation made the announcement on Sunday in Quebec City. The move comes amid warnings about a software vulnerability in a Java-based library of an Apache product. The Quebec government has been working to identify which websites are at risk one by one before putting them back online. The Canadian press has learned the federal government has planted only 0.4% of the 2 billion trees it pledged to put in the ground across Canada by 2030. Figures obtained through an access to information request show 8.5 million trees have been planted as of mid-November. The government has said the 2 billion trees would help Canada meet its climate change targets while creating roughly 4,300 new jobs. Natural Resources Canada insists it is on track to meet its target. And the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have won the 108th Grey Cup. The Blue Bombers beat the Hamilton Tiger Cats 33-25 in overtime. The win at Tim Hortons Field makes the Blue Bombers repeat Grey Cup champions. Up next, our interview with Dr. Robert Barney, Olympic history expert. The Chinese government's treatment of its Uyghur minority could come before the courts in Argentina at about the same time that the Winter Olympics open on February 4th in Beijing. The case will be brought as a universal jurisdiction criminal complaint in Argentina by lawyers representing China's ethnic Uyghur population. This comes as Canada, along with the UK, Australia, and the US, decided on a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympic Games. They cite human rights concerns, including allegations of genocide against the Muslim Uyghur minority in China's Xinjiang province. But what do these moves mean for the iconic international games that have taken place for hundreds of years? Well, joining us now to give us deeper insight is Dr. Robert K. Barney, professor at Western University and an Olympic Games history expert. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks a lot.
Now, in this diplomatic boycott, international governments are refusing to send any government delegates to the Games. So what roles do these officials play when attending the Olympic Games in the first place?
Well, theirs is mostly a ceremonial role. They'll appear at receptions, few little meetings with government officials and Olympic officials, but they're just there for show. Nothing really takes place between them on a grand scale.
All right, sir. Well, the Chinese government is now under the spotlight for its human rights abuses against its Uyghur minority population and its actions in Hong Kong. So how many countries have joined this diplomatic boycott so far, and what message are they trying to send through this?
Well, we only know about half a dozen right now. The UK, Australia, us and Canada and the United States and Kosovo. A Baltic country is considering it, but that's about the extent of it so far.
And what sort of message do you think this move is sending to the Chinese government?
Well, it's one they're going to largely ignore and press on with business. But it does show the world and shows the Chinese, at least, that the conditions in that country are not being totally not taken care of, not even observed. The world is watching.
All right, sir. And on the other hand, we have the Chinese government saying that this diplomatic boycott is upending the political neutrality of sport. So is this a relevant point within this situation?
Well, it's partially a relevant point, but politics have always played their role in the Olympic Games, including keeping countries out of them. And the one thing that's been learned from these boycotts is that no longer is the world going to tolerate boycotts that sacrifice the athletes' participation in the games. The world wants to see them participate. The corporate sponsorship levels throughout the world want them to participate, and they're going to participate whether there are diplomatic boycotts or not.
All right, sir. And we know this isn't the first time that a diplomatic boycott has been announced for the Olympics. So take us back to when and why these boycotts were implemented previously.
Well, they date back to 1936, when governments were faced with the prospect of going to support the Hitler Games. Canada's government sent them. They wanted the representation there and ignored what was going on in Germany at that time. The U.S. had a very close vote on whether to support the team financially or not the government, but the sporting federation, and that the umbrella organization that controlled the Olympic participation. And it was a very narrow vote, over 600 votes cast, and it was practically even, only 3 votes deciding in favor of them going or being supported financially. And then in 1980 and 1984, with the tit for tat in the middle of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, the Jimmy Carter government of the United States rallied a huge number of countries, over 60, 65, I believe, to boycott the Moscow Olympics in 1980, including the athletes. But they had a lot of trouble trying to get the athletes and the United States Olympic Committee to agree to support the boycott. and they bludgeoned them with threats of finances that support the Olympic Committee in the United States with withholding those. And the same way with Canada. Canada followed the United States' lead with that, and there was pressure brought by financial interest sponsored by the government that said we're going to line up behind the United States in this and not go. And then, of course, in 1980, this was 1984. Rather, the Soviets turned around and with the Soviet bloc, the Eastern European countries, but took them all but one, Romania, out of those games in Los Angeles in 1984.
Canadians can expect a sharp rise in food prices next year to reach record highs. Canada's food price report predicts the average family of 4 will pay an extra $966 for groceries in 2022, for a total annual food bill of nearly $14,800. That's a 7% rise over this year and the biggest jump that this report has ever predicted. The report says the pandemic only accelerated an 11-year trend of rising food prices. Key drivers pushing costs higher include supply chain disruptions, labor market issues, and adverse weather events. Well, joining us now to give us more insight into Canada's food price report is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, chief researcher of this report and senior director at the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Doctor, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Well, thank you.
So tell us a little bit more on the key drivers behind this increase in food prices, sir.
Well, when you look at the world, I guess there are 3 factors. One, supply chains. I think everyone is now aware that there are some issues with supply chains. That's due to 2 reasons. One, capacity to actually to move products around. You need capacity. You need boats. You need drivers for trucks, and it's been a problem. And of course, the other reason is the fact that we're trying to actually restart a global economy. It's like steering a huge cruise ship with paddles. So we'll get to destination, but it does take time. And when it takes time, it costs more money. So that's one factor. The second factor is labor. Across the supply chain, we're seeing some labor issues, shortages, or if you do have talent, if you do have people, you have to pay them more. That's what we're seeing right now, especially in North America. And finally, grains, commodities are actually more expensive. So if you're feeding livestock, if you're producing food, inputs are costing more.
All right, doctor, and what types of food products will likely be impacted?
So when you look at the report, so first of all, in 2021, meat was the big story. We don't think it's going to be the case in 2022. So if you're a meat lover out there, that's good news. However, we are expecting dairy to be an issue. We know that just recently the Canadian Dairy Commission actually announced a recommendation to increase farm gate milk prices by 8.4%. That's going to put a lot of pressure on the entire sector, especially in processing. So we are expecting companies like Saputo, Lactalis, Agropur to increase prices, charge to grocers, and that eventually will catch up to us. And the other sector is going to be food service, restaurants. We are expecting menu prices to be adjusted again up to 8% in 2022.
All right, sir. So how soon will Canadian families see these rising food prices in 2022 at the grocery stores?
Well, for menus, I think people have noticed already. In fact, 65% of Canadians in the last month have actually gone out at least once to a restaurant. So I assume that people have noticed that menu prices are much higher than they used to. That's going to continue into 2022. For dairy, though, the increase will start in February. So do expect price hikes in the dairy section probably end of February, early March. As for vegetables and bakery goods, those are 2 other sectors or sections which will be impacted by food inflation. We are expecting prices to rise steadily through the winter into the spring.
And is there any way that Canadian families can prepare for these rising costs?
Essentially, you just have to up your game. Show up at the grocery store knowing exactly how much you should be paying for items on your grocery list. Go to more than one place if you can, if you have time. And I would do the opposite of hoarding. Instead of hoarding, going once every week, 2 weeks at a grocery store, go more than one time. You'll end up saving more because supply chains are much slower. A lot of people are actually buying products that are basically they go sour before the expiry date, or they are ripe very, very quickly. So if you go to the grocery store more often, you'll end up wasting less, and you may actually end up finding more enjoy tonight deals. So that's what I would do if you want to save some money.
All right, Dr. Charlebois, a quick 30 seconds left here, but where can our viewers learn more about Canada's food price report?
Well, this report is the product of 4 universities working together, essentially: University of Guelph, University of Saskatchewan, University of British Columbia, and Dalhousie University. You can go on our own website at the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, and it's on our front page right there.
Dr. Charlebois, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for joining us.
Take care.
The EU threatening Russia, the security flaw in Log4j, and more stories coming up next. European Union leaders are looking to avoid a Russian military invasion into neighboring Ukraine with the threat of unprecedented sanctions and the promise of diplomatic talks. Russia's massing of troops on the Ukraine border takes center stage at today's summit of the 27 government leaders. It is reinforced by the plea of Ukraine's president to start imposing more sanctions before any possible incursion, rather than after the border has been crossed. Meanwhile, Russia says it has submitted draft documents outlining security arrangements it wants to negotiate with the United States and its NATO allies. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says a senior Russian envoy stands ready to depart for talks in a neutral country. He says President Vladimir Putin may have another call with U.S. President Joe Biden before the year's end. In a video call last week, Mr. Biden voiced concern about a buildup of Russian troops near Ukraine's border. Mr. Putin has denied plans of launching an invasion. Security pros say it's one of the worst computer vulnerabilities they have ever seen. They say state-backed Chinese and Iranian hackers and rogue cryptocurrency miners have already exploited the flaw in the widely used Log4j utility. The Department of Homeland Security is sounding the alarm, ordering federal agencies to urgently eliminate the bug. The affected software is small and often undocumented. The flaw lets internet-based hackers seize control of everything from industrial control systems to consumer electronics. The Bank of England has raised its key interest rates to combat surging consumer prices. Today's move makes it the first central bank among the world's leading economies to do so since the COVID-19 pandemic began. The increase in the bank's main rate to 0.25% from the record low of 0.1% was a surprise given the rapid spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. Turkey's central bank has again cut interest rates despite soaring consumer prices that are making it difficult for people to buy food and other basic goods. The move on Thursday sent the country's currency to record lows against the U.S. dollar. The bank cut a key rate from 15% to 14%, though inflation is running at 21%. It is in line with the policies of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has been pressing for low borrowing costs to boost growth and exports, as well as investments. New witness accounts allege that thousands of ethnic Tigrayans have been forcibly expelled, detained, or killed in one of the most inaccessible areas of Ethiopia's year-long war. Thursday's joint statement by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International cites interviews with more than 30 witnesses and relatives. It follows a report by the Associated Press earlier last month citing people who fled. Bangladesh has marked 50 years of victory over Pakistan in a war for independence by hosting a military parade with the Indian president as guest of honor. On December 16, 1971, Pakistani soldiers surrendered to a joint India-Bangladesh force after 9 months of fighting. This formally made Bangladesh a new nation under the leadership of independence leader Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. the father of current Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. A former employee of Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba says human resources and upper management wouldn't address her accusation of sexual assault. So she went into the busy cafeteria at the headquarters of Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba and screamed out her plight. Now she's paying the price. The company fired her. She also faces online harassment, accusations of lying from the wives of the two men she accused, and a defamation lawsuit from Alibaba's vice president, who was forced to resign. One person has died as a powerful storm system swept across America's Great Plains and Midwest last night. The storms closed highways and spawned at least 13 reported tornadoes within Nebraska and Iowa. The U.S. National Weather Service says the storm is shifting north of the Great Lakes today with high winds and snow. Environment Canada has issued wind warnings and a special weather statement for much of Ontario today. A gang in Haiti has released all remaining hostages from the Ohio-based Christian Aid Ministries missionary group. 17 members of the group, including one Canadian, were captured 2 months ago. 5 had already been released. Police didn't release any details on the health of the hostages. Making gingerbread houses is a fun holiday tradition, but Natalie Salerno took things to a new level. The young baker has made epic candy creations of famous buildings, including the Mattel from Schitt's Creek. I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. Take care, Canada. Have a great weekend.